Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about heritage and heritage architecture and what do you do when you think that you might have either a character or heritage overlay that might be impacting you with regards to, can I knock it down? Can I keep it? Must I keep some of it? How do I do all of that? What are the things that I need to look for in order to both respect the past and also I guess, try to plan for the future. Now, in order to do that, I've got a very special guest today. I've got Wesley Spencer from Wexhaus, so from Wexhaus Studio, I should say. Wesley, welcome aboard, mate.
Hello, everyone.
Mate, firstly, who is Wesley Spencer? Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're the guy that we should be speaking to, and who is Wexhaus?
All right, wonderful. So I'm Wesley Spencer. I've been a practicing architect for about 16 years now. I've been running my own studio for a while, and we specialise in heritage. I've gone ahead and done an additional Masters in Cultural Heritage to qualify myself. As a result, I provide expert evidence advice to matters that go to the tribunal. I provide advice to other architects who are experiencing difficulties getting approvals for projects that are in heritage overlays, as well as we do most of our own work in the heritage sphere, but not strictly. I'm also a board director at the National Trust of Australia in Victoria, so I'm heavily involved in anything relating to heritage.
Okay, so you're primarily based in Victoria, but you've got, I guess, the ability to work in multiple jurisdictions across the country. We're going to try and we're going to dive deep into some of your experience in Melbourne, but we're also going to kind of broaden it out because it's slightly different impacts in different places and different terminologies. And, you know, why should every council in the country keep the same terminology? Why would they make it simple? But let's firstly talk about the principles of heritage and why is, I guess, respecting our past an important thing?
Yeah, so we're not trying to create museums of suburbs or houses that make it impossible for us to live in and enjoy our places. What we're really trying to do is to preserve things so that as we go into the future, we don't turn back and go, oh, darn, it's such a shame that we demolished all of these wonderful buildings that mean so much to us today. So we're just trying to preserve the things that we already value. If collectively none of us value those things, then what we consider to be of significance will change, and we always reassess how we value certain things and what parts of those things that we consider to be valuable are significant and what parts we're willing to forego. So that's something that's constantly evolving. And it's not just the building itself, but it's also sometimes the intangible impacts of that. So for example, we might consider a place to have heritage significance, not because the building itself is special, but because a prominent person like a prime minister or a notable murderer has some kind of affiliation, like Ned Kelly, for example.
We protect a few murderers' houses, do we, mate?
Yeah, like, you know, there's some buildings that, you know, Ned Kelly graffitied his name into, and so that wall is very significant. But the building of itself doesn't.
About the guy that stuck everyone in the barrels or something like that.
No. Yeah. So that's you know, a bit of a summary. Back in the 70s, so it came after a period where there was a lot of demolition, specifically in Victoria, of prominent buildings to rebuild the city and to make it more usable. And after we saw a substantial amount of loss, ICOMOS got together and established what's called the Borough Charter, and the place which is borough is in South Australia, and basically all the relevant people in heritage got together in borough and just developed a charter that was based on the Venice Charter for heritage preservation, but better. and so it considered other things, like I just mentioned, that were intangible. So not necessarily the material aspects of it, but we also needed to extend ourselves to valuable Indigenous places and spaces that might be significant. And so they've developed this charter, which is a set of principles that we consider to be a bit of a guideline or a rule book as to how we preserve and value and assess significance in heritage. The main tenets of what we are trying to do when it comes to heritage is to preserve as much as possible and change as little as possible to keep it in its doing as much as necessary to take care of a place while changing as little as possible. Again, that might conflict a little bit with the objectives of people who might want to, say, remove a building because they want to put 3 townhouses on there. But there are ways that we can explore to try to achieve the same outcomes for a developer, for example, that might still consider how we preserve the heritage significance of a place. So it's not the fact that there is a heritage overlay or a heritage association with a place doesn't necessarily mean you just can't do anything. It might just mean that you can't do specific things. So we can look at ways of exploring acceptable ways to develop a site.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Barrow Charter and you very, very quickly said ICOMOS, but we didn't say what ICOMOS was. So the International Council of Monuments and Sites is ICOMOS. Yes. For anyone out there nerdy enough to actually go and want to read and research the Barrow Charter, highly recommended, because it is the principles that every single state are going to apply. Now, whilst the terminology might be different and whilst I guess each state's and local jurisdictions are going to deem different things of significant. Once it's been deemed significant, how you actually protect that and how you respect that is really the Barrow Charter that we're actually talking about. So
yeah,
highly recommend everyone go look at that.
And as an expert, when we're trying to interpret a council guideline or a rule, we always go back to, well, what's the fundamental basis of that rule? It's the Barrow Charter. And so if someone is willingly misinterpreting the application of that rule, we can say, well, no, ultimately the Barrow Charter is the thing that we're using. It's the 10 commandments of heritage. So we're going back to how that might influence the interpretation of that council rule.
Yeah. So now, what are some, and you've touched on some of these already, but what are some of the things that might deem a place, whether it be an individual property or whether it be an actual area, what are some of the things that might deem a place to have, I guess, heritage or cultural significance?
So there are basically 8 criteria in which we consider a place to have heritage significance. The most common is aesthetic significance that is applied to dwelling, for example. And the aesthetic significance is what ties into, say, the neighbourhood character of an area or the character overlay. There are others, like I said, because of their association with a certain individual or a certain culture, and the list can sort of go on. But the most relevant to architecture, built form in the residential sphere, will be aesthetic significance. So we have to address what are the elements of the building that we can see from the public realm, and in some cases, if it's of national significance or state-based significance, it will be important to consider the significance within the building as well, so the interior as well as the exterior, and So we might look at things like, oh, this has, this is a Victorian house with lacework, like every other Victorian house, but this particular lacework has been custom designed, and it has, some flora from the Australian outback that they've carved into the mould. Same with, internal cornices. So there's a spectacular mansion called Labassa that was saved by the skin of its teeth in Victoria, in Caulfield, and that one has flora and fauna in the cornices of the plasterwork. Like it's remarkable how much effort was put into making this mansion, and it's not something you would immediately identify when you look at it. It's something that you need to take time to sort of appreciate. But sometimes you identify unusual and unique aspects of a building that make it special, and so they're the elements that you might find put into what's called a statement of significance. So if you buy a substantial building, it will often come with a statement of significance that's on the State Heritage Register. So in Victoria, we have Heritage Victoria. So if you go to the Heritage Victoria database, you'll find, you enter the address of your property, and you might find that it has a statement of significance if it's a significant enough dwelling, and it'll identify all of the unique aspects of that building. It might talk about the columns, it might talk about the windows or the unique roof or something like that.
Yeah. So, and I guess that's touched on kind of the next element, where it might be, hey, that one individual house or that one individual property is protected, or it might be, hey, this region or this precinct has, a theme that everything is actually sitting around, right? And so, hence where some of the terminology challenges start to come into play with different state jurisdictional boundaries. So, but we're functionally talking about a neighbourhood character in Victorian sense. In a Queensland sense, we'd be talking about precincts and neighbourhood plans that actually sit there, and I guess we're trying to make different areas look and feel particular ways.
Yeah, here in Victoria, we do have the neighbourhood character overlay as well as a heritage overlay, and in many cases they do overlap a little bit. So when we look at heritage significance, we consider the heritage impact on the neighbourhood as well as looking at the neighbourhood character. We do have certain pockets that have a very unique character that we as a community want to preserve, and people are willing to pay a substantial premium to be able to live in that particular pocket of that suburb, because it has unique trees or tree-lined streets, or it might have no parking on the main streets, so you're not sort of seeing cars all over the place, and its car parking is off the right of ways, so you don't see garages on the fronts of the buildings, and the buildings might be set within a garden setting. So the neighbourhood character might exist to preserve those values, so that someone doesn't just come along and put, a 2 metre high wall with a garage door right up on the boundary, and it's a 3-story building that goes from boundary to boundary. They're very unpleasant buildings to that will then detract or diminish the character values within the area. So that's where neighbourhood character exists, but doesn't necessarily mean that the building itself has to be of heritage significance or old. It could be a brand new building, but they want it still to be within a garden setting and all the things that I used as an example earlier. And then there might be pockets of areas that were developed, back in the Federation style, so back in 1900 or 1901, and all of them have, they're all unique houses, but there's just sort of a street completely lined with one style of house. And so you might start to consider the neighbourhood character of that area being predominantly of Federation style houses, and therefore it would be a little bit unusual to suddenly have a modern white cookie cutter house there. You know,
Yeah.
it would really interfere with the character appreciation of the space. So so that's where heritage and neighborhood character might overlap a little bit.
Yeah, and we touched on this, I guess, on our pre-chat, and there are very, very specific use cases where neighborhood character can be used extraordinarily well to preserve and protect unique individual pockets like that. In some instances, and not all instances, it's been used as a blunt instrument to impact creating the future heritage. And this is what I guess a concept, you know, from a high level philosophical point of view. Character is created, or heritage is created, by the needs and the wants of the people of the day. And so there's potential that if that blunt instrument is used inappropriately, it can actually stop the future heritage. So today's properties becoming the heritage of the future. And so it's a very delicate balance between how do we respect the past, but also how do we create new pasts.
Yeah.
And that's where you know, I don't know where that line is, but there is a line. How do we draw that better?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, and I appreciate what you're saying, and in most cases, I agree exactly with your position. And in fact, most of my work is arguing with councils to approve applications of designs we've prepared, because we believe that these are going to contribute and improve and enhance the heritage character, or the character generally, of an area. And one day, my beautiful house that I've designed will be something that is considered significant, you know, in another 50 to 100 years. And if they refuse it, what we're going to end up with is something that's reductive, that's boring, and that just ticks a box because council has a simple checklist, as you said, because they've used a mallet to address the situation. The initial, like, way back when this needed to be rolled out, they didn't have the resources to do a house by house or case by case basis to assess the relevance or the good design of a particular proposal. And so they just had to create simple checklists for planners to be able to digest through hundreds and hundreds of planning applications. And I think that what was intended was that eventually they would start to distill that list and make it more fit for purpose, or even do away with the list, and to be able to have a system in which they can assess every application on a case-by-case basis. That hasn't happened as quickly as we thought it would, and as a result, we're still dealing with situations where we design a building, and because they're trying to address one issue, for example, they're trying to stop concrete tilt-up construction, the use of concrete tilt-up construction in a residential area where you've just got this big concrete box as masquerading as a house. They then say, okay, well, we need to have two tiers, sort of like a cake of house. So the first floor has to be set back from the ground floor. But then when I design an elegant Japanese style modern house with vast white walls, but it's meant to be a statement, it gets rejected because the council is trying to deal with one issue but puts my beautiful design in the same bag. So it's a situation where we have to negotiate with council. In many cases, I have to ask to speak to the planner's manager. And because I'm an architect and I understand not only the planning schemes and the heritage significance, I'm able to then negotiate how we address a thing. So, for example, we're dealing with we dealt with a heritage, a building in a heritage overlay. It's a Californian bungalow. The building had been repainted several times, and it was just basically a boring beige now. and I didn't want it to be a boring beige. And so what we're doing is a white box extension at the back. I love it when people come to me and say, I don't want a white box at the back of my house. So I actually lean into it and make them a white box. But as a result, I then decided to make the Californian bungalow entirely black. And council's response to that was, no, you can't make it black. That's not fitting with the character. So I presented them with all these examples of Californian bungalows that not necessarily were black, but were not original colours to the Californian bungalow style. And I said, well, these are all contradicting the character. What you're implementing, or what you're forcing me to do, is to conform to this ideal that you have in your own head as a planner of what you think is appropriate, but that's not necessarily appropriate. And after a bit of arguing and talking to the council's heritage advisor, I got my way. It's going to be black. So it's understanding why we're doing a thing, and not just and also understanding the fundamental basis of what the thing is that they're trying to preserve, because I was able to then respond appropriately by saying, well, here are examples of a blue Californian bungalow and a pink one, or even a white one. You would never see a white Californian bungalow in 1925. It didn't exist.
Yeah. So it's, I guess, that delicate balance between, I guess, respecting the past and creating new futures and new interpretations of the past, and things that in the future we're going to look back on and be proud of, to say, well, that is equally worthy of protecting. And so it is a difficult tightrope to walk. And architecture is one of those things where it is very interpretive, and your perspective and my perspective and their perspective are all going to be slightly different, and hence where some of the challenges actually start to lie. And hopefully why our conversation today is going to shed a little bit more light and perspective on this for everybody out there.
Yeah.
Now, we kind of touched on, I guess, a couple of the reasons why things might be protected in some way, shape, or form. I guess I thought of a couple of other examples that I might throw out there, because every jurisdiction, every council has particular things that they're trying to look after. So you touched on, there might be national significance, there might be state significance, there might be local significance. So locally, that each area might have a different perspective on those things. So in Queensland, where I'm typically based, I know that we've got two key dates, so 1946 and 1911, and depending upon, I guess, what happens, I guess, in and around those dates, what you can and can't do around those houses is very different. So pre-1946, if that house, so that's your very traditional Queenslander type building, what they call Queenslander, anything that's pre-1946, the facade of that and anywhere up to the pitch of the roof must be protected. So it has to stay on site. It cannot be relocated to another site. You cannot demolish the entire house, and but you can demolish to the rear of the pitch of the roof. But you can pick it up and relocate it to a different part of the house, a different part of the block, I should say, because those things are built on stumps. Okay. Yeah. So which in I guess in Victoria, not a lot of houses get relocated, right? Whereas in Queensland, a heck of a lot do. And you gave it a good example of in Victoria where you can relocate houses previously. So what was that example?
So depending on the classification, so within a council jurisdiction, as you've explained, we might have a site or a building that's considered to be of significant heritage, within a heritage overlay, to have a significant heritage listing, or contributory heritage listing, or the third tier, the lowest tier, is non-contributory, in which case it might be have been heavily altered in the past, and so it no longer bears the the aspects or elements of what we consider to be significant anymore. Like they've stripped away the lacework, they've stripped away the original roof, they've replaced the Victorian window with, you know, big 1960s steel window. They've stripped away the tessellate tile and put concrete. Don't know why they would do that, but anyway.
Fibro and asbestos and all those sorts of
and all those things, all those wonderful things. So those buildings tend to get reclassified as non-contributory by people like myself when we do a heritage study for a council, and then that means that in future a developer might buy the property. It's still in a heritage overlay, but it doesn't have any significance, and therefore they can put in an application to demolish it. If they were to demolish it, let's pretend it's one of a run of 10 Victorian townhouses, terraces. We see a lot of those in Victoria. I'm not sure if you see a lot of those up in Queensland. Probably not.
We see Queenslanders in Queensland. You see Victorians. That's how that works.
Okay. So it might be one of a run of many similar type of houses, even Queenslanders, and the developer wants to propose something highly unusual that will really stick out in that streetscape. So that would be where we would start to sort of frown and say, no, that's an inappropriate use of that site. Because of the character in this instance, or because of what's being removed. Now, you can still put in an application to demolish the building if it's non-contributory. It's just that what you design in its stead needs to be appropriate. And that's something that we help other architects, or we design ourselves as we see necessary for that site. Additionally, we can relocate buildings, and sometimes that might assist the application where you're saying to the council, I'm not going to demolish it, but I am relocating it from site A to site B, so that at least council is then satisfied that we're not losing something that we consider to have some level of significance, usually when it's contributory. It doesn't carry the whole application through. It won't be the reason that they approve it, but it might assist their assessment process because you're not losing that significance, and it's going somewhere else that is appropriate.
Yeah, and very important to state, folks, that depending upon where you are, council's willingness to allow you to relocate that to an alternative site will vary from absolutely a hard no to, well, that depends on the kind of property and the kind of protection and where you're actually relocating it to. So it's super important that you actually understand your local jurisdictional challenges here. So an example we touched on before, the 1946 houses, I can't relocate to another site. I can relocate it on the site, so I could put it in the front corner. But a pre-1911 house, well, that, because the age of that and the significance of that is almost certainly going to be more in a city where the high-rise density is, they understand that the contrast between those two things, it doesn't fit. So that's where they would be understanding and respectful of, okay, we're going to relocate that to an area, but it must go into another area where that character also exists. So you can't just kind of put it in the middle of the burbs, for example. So, there are times where it's a hard no, and there is times where it's a very definite maybe. And where it can be done, then generally council is going to want to see that the house actually gets stood up at the other end and becomes a house again. They're not wanting you to pick it up, relocate it, and park it at the side of the road for 2 or 3 years while it rots and deteriorates. They want it to actually get reinstated straight away.
Yeah, I mean, and also if you've got someone like us to do the relevant research, you might actually find that that house was already relocated from elsewhere to this site. So that would make it easier to convince council that, relocating it is, part of its life story. So you just have to sort of present it in a way that makes it, a charming tale of the life of the house.
Yeah. So an example of, I can tell you a tall tale here, an example of a house that was previously relocated onto site, a project I was looking at doing many, many years ago. There was some pre-46 houses which are protected in Queensland, and there was a house that was not in place in 1946 that was sitting in the middle of me having access to a driveway to open up the backyard to put a whole bunch of townhouses at the back. That house was relocated there, but so it came into existence on that site in about 1970. But because it was actually a pre-46 house originally, it qualified as no longer being able to be relocated a second time. And so the ability to unlock that one property was the ability to unlock a 6 townhouse project, or just leave it in place and protect that neighborhood, which ended up being the case in this instance. So be careful, folks. Just because it's been relocated once doesn't mean it be relocated twice.
I mean, yeah, that's a very disappointing case for a developer to have gone through the process of purchasing it, designing it, and then ending up where they started, having to sell it pretty much without making much capital improvement to the site.
Well, that was all during due diligence. We didn't actually end up settling on that one.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I was going to suggest, when you're doing your due diligence, and if you do have a heritage overlay, you can engage people like myself in your relevant state to do a opportunities and constraints assessment, and they'll find what is doable and what is not doable and what must be protected. So that will give you some clear guidance as to what you can do before you commit yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the research that having engaged with heritage architects in the past, some of the research that entails, folks, is going through the archives of council and looking at the historical approvals and what was done in and around the area and a whole bunch of things like that. So what was the architecture of the start of the day? What was the architecture of that particular house? When did it actually come into existence? What were the things that were happening from a historical perspective, and what is the context of that property, and a whole bunch more. So very worthy of actually engaging someone like Wesley.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we also dig up newspaper clippings of the house or the place. We did a bank, for example, in the country, and in Goldfields part of the country, and it had like this many robberies and break-ins, and they had someone who wrote all about the renovation that occurred, and so we were able to use a lot of that information to influence or to inform what we did next, and we were able to look at the parts of the building that we could restore, because we couldn't tell what used to be there. It's gone. It's really fun sometimes to find some of that information, including murders. I love murders.
It's very, very morbid, mate. Very good. Okay, so in doing some of that history and working out, what significance, whether it's significant, contributory, non-contributory, what were the things that are sitting in and around it. All of that's going to inform what is possible to be done on the site. Now, there are many different things that people may want to do. So they may want to demolish the entire house. They may want to demolish part of the house. They may want to relocate it on a different part of the site. What are some of the things to consider with regards to whether it be a partial or a complete demolition are actually going to be allowed?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, here in Victoria, at least, we've got certain rules of thumb. They're not strict, hard rules, but you need to show, for example, especially if you've got a significant, that's a very difficult one to convince council to do things. So even if you're demolishing something at the back that's not visible from the public realm, because it's classified as significant, you will have to jump through certain hoops. The thing is, though, even if it is significant, most of these buildings have been tampered with in some way before heritage existed. And so you can attend to or alter aspects of a building that have already been, that are not original. For example, we wanted to put a door where a window used to be, and of course, if the window was original, it's facing the backyard. If the window was original, we wouldn't have been allowed to do that. But I was able to substantiate that that was not an original window and showed evidence of that because I understand what I'm looking at. And because of that, we were able to convince council to let us put the door in that wall opening. But generally, if you want to do an extension or a separate dwelling at the rear, you would be allowed to see the building from the street. It's just that it can't be, I use the example, it can't be hot pink because that would that would detract from the significant building that's in front of it. So the idea is that it's supposed to just sort of disappear into the background and not speak too loudly. It's supposed to be a quiet background fodder. That's unfortunate for a lot of architects because their egos drive them to designing things that are loud and ostentatious. But you just have to, unfortunately, when you're a heritage architect, you end up being a bit of a boring architectural designer because...
You said it, mate, not me.
Because you're just being so considerate of the thing that's in front, that you're preserving its integrity and its significance. So there are rules of thumb, like, it has to, the renovation or the extension has to be 2 rooms back. So you don't see it from closer than 2 rooms, especially if you're extending to the side. So if a lot of people are now saying, there's the main bedroom in the front room of the original Victorian or whatever, and we've got a metre on the side there, let's tuck in a tiny ensuite bathroom. And obviously you can see the ensuite bathroom from the street, so it has to be treated in a certain way, but it does need to be set back a certain distance from the front wall of the building, so that it's not, again, not taking up not attracting too much attention. In terms of conservation as well, it usually works in your favour if you are doing things to assist in the conservation of the house. So you might be putting an extension at the rear. It makes a very big difference if you're then saying to council in the application, I'm restoring the original lacework and the original windows to the front facade and the original roof material, etc., compared with someone who's putting a modern extension at the rear and not attending to those things. They've changed the lacework, so I'm just going to take it off. They've changed the roofing material, so I'm just going to replace it with new roofing material that's neither heritage nor the same as what was already just there a minute ago. So they're not contributing to the conservation efforts of the of council, and they're not making a contribution to the character of the streetscape. So that's what will really help. Somebody who understands what the original lacework would have been. I mean, lacework is lacework to some people, but actually different lacework styles apply to different periods. So if I have a Victorian house from 1880 and I have a Victorian house from 1860, I'm going to have different styles of lacework, same as the doors, the windows, all of these things are going to look different from different styles. And some people think they're doing the world a favour by, putting those little glazing bars in their windows. They belonged to 1860s houses because they couldn't make large glass panes in Australia, and so they had to ship glass from the UK, and because they had to ship glass from the UK, they didn't want to break the glass, and so they had little glass panels as opposed to large sheets of glass. And as soon as they could make glass in Australia, what do you think they were doing? The massive trend was to replace all of the windows and get rid of those horrible glazing bars that they hated. So when you're looking at a Victorian from 1895 with glazing bars, the first thing I look at is, well, no, that wouldn't have existed at the time. I mean, they had them, but they wouldn't have put that in because they thought that that was oppressive at the time. They wouldn't want that in their house. So it's just like today we've got, you know, double and triple glazed windows in fancy aluminium frames, and us saying, oh no, I'm going to go for that, you know, that thin aluminium frame that they did in the 60s with just a 6mm plate glass. Like we wouldn't do it. It's just not something we would do.
No, of course not. So look, I guess some reasons why, and I guess where I was trying to go with that question, some reasons why we might be able to either partially or wholly demolish a house. What are some of the arguments that we might be able to have? Now, the ones that come to mind for me would be: is the existing house, structurally unsound? And not just structurally unsound, but commercially unviable for actually restoring, because being structurally unsound doesn't necessarily mean knock it down. It means it might be able to be repaired, but is that commercially viable? So, so that's now. I don't know the process in Victoria, but I can speak to the process in Queensland. Process in Queensland is we need to actually have a registered engineer to actually assess the structural integrity of that, and then a builder actually quoting on the ability to reinstate that versus the cost to actually replace that completely.
Yeah, correct. So so that's a very valid one. So structurally unsound, in some cases, if it's a very difficult pill for council to swallow, they will ask for multiple engineers' statements that explain why it's structurally unsound. And when you say commercially non-viable, when we're talking about heritage buildings, we've got a lot of building material and building materials that we cannot replicate today. So when you explain that it's unviable for you to restore the building, what you're effectively saying is we just don't have the material. We cannot reproduce this in an integrous way to adequately restore that building, unless you get salvaged material from here, there, and everywhere to make up the difference, which might be nearly impossible for a genuinely defunct building. What you need to explain or to verify is that no, there's, you know, there are stumps under this house. I mean, no one would expect you to restore a building with the same type of stumps that you would have done 200 years ago. But like you could still use concrete stumps, for example. But in some cases, you know, you can't reinstate aspects of the building that are original that make it significant. And so by the time you've addressed all of that, it's just not viable financially. Additionally, things like termites, if it's beyond a point of salvaging for termites, you know, what I mentioned earlier is that if it's been heavily altered, and that's not always visible, so council doesn't have a visibility of what's inside the building or what's at the rear of the building. All they can see is aerial views and street views, and if they can't establish how much of the building has been altered, you can then present a case to council and say, look, there's all this asbestos, there's all this interference, none of the original plasterwork, the mouldings, the flooring, the cladding, the windows is still there. Therefore, there should be really no grounds for you to oblige us to protect this. For example, we've got a heritage building that we're doing an extension to at the rear. You can't see the extension, so that's not the issue. But one of the things that was altered was at the front of the veranda, they replaced the tessellate tiles with a concrete slab. And based on the way it looks, I would say it was a 1960s concrete slab. So when we put in an application, we wanted to remove the concrete slab and not replace it with another tessellate tile. We just wanted to leave it as just gravel under the, I know that's unusual, but I just didn't want a horrible concrete slab there that's not part of or contributing to the heritage significance of the building. Council's response was, you can't remove that concrete slab as part of the contributory fabric of the building. And I had to then educate them as to, no, it's not. It's clearly an addition. Here are photos, and this is not what it should look like. And you can't compel me to put in something that I don't know what it looked like. I mean, of course, if I wanted to, from an aesthetic point of view, put in a new tessellate tile veranda, I could, but and that's what they would have preferred, but I didn't want to do that in this instance. So they can't force you to restore a building.
Yeah. So other reasons to potentially either demolish or partially demolish, the house itself has no character. And we touched on this before. I guess sometimes they've been misassessed. Sometimes they've been modified to a point where, I guess, whilst it was of significance in the day, over many generations, people have actually modified that, and that's no longer the case. So I guess we've kind of touched on that one already. And the last one is that I've seen is that whilst that particular house may have some, I guess, cultural significance, there's nothing around it that actually does. And so there is no character or heritage in the area in order to protect. So if you're surrounded by a concrete jungle, and that's the only thing sitting there, there are times where council are going to go, okay, we understand in this instance. So we've seen those arguments, I guess, successful in places.
I haven't seen that here, but I can't speak for the whole country, and I don't think that that's how they would respond to that here in Victoria. But okay. The other thing is we don't classify significance on an age of a building. As we were talking about in our pre-chat, we would classify things of equal significance effectively, despite their years, if they're both well designed and if they're both unique enough and well preserved. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums up the grounds of where you might want to demolish a building. I think it's worth considering as well, just generally speaking, what it is that heritage is trying to achieve. And heritage is identified, or heritage significance and neighbourhood character have both identified things that we as a community collectively value. And if we try to preserve those things, then you're doing a community service. But what you're also doing, if you're like putting a developer's hat on, is, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Oh, we like that old building because it's got charm. We want to buy a heritage building because it has charm. That's what people who want to live in houses are looking for, some charm, not, you know, plasterboard boxes. And so effectively, what it's trying to do is encourage you to consider the options of preserving what you can, if you don't need to demolish it, and building the additional thing either at the back or something like that. And we can help you to, we as in heritage advisors generally, not us specifically, can help to show you what you can achieve with a site that might have a heritage overlay or a heritage place or building on it that should be preserved, and figure out how you can work around that to both preserve that, but also achieve your goals from an investment perspective.
Yeah. So where I was talking about before, and maybe more the terminology differences between states and that sort of thing, I guess the difference between character of a dwelling versus heritage of a building. So character is, I guess, something, I'll talk Queensland, they use a specific terminology called traditional building character. So that is not heritage. So that is, hey, we like that thing, we want to look and preserve that thing, but we don't need to keep everything. Whereas heritage in Queensland is, no. That you've got to keep all of that thing, and it's not going to go anywhere. So that's where I was talking about the distinction before to say, hey, there's no other character in the area. That was the reference I was talking to, as opposed to heritage. And I just wanted to be very clear. So if that was a heritage building, no, that's staying. So
well, that actually leads us to an interesting subject, which is certain councils will have character guidelines and say, oh, the character of this suburb or this precinct within a suburb is, for example, 7 metre setbacks, front lawn which is landscaped, no car parks at the front, no driveway, large trees, and a pitched roof. I don't know. So that they might be the characteristics that put together form what's called a neighbourhood character. And so when you put in an application for a new building, they would typically want you to follow this guideline and conform to this character so that your building doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. In most cases, they are guidelines and they're not mandated. However, most planners treat them as a rule book, and if you don't conform exactly to them, they will give you a refusal or make a requirement for you to change it. And you just have to know how to negotiate with them or tell them that that's not on to get what you want. And you have to understand what those guidelines, whether they're guidelines or whether they're mandated. And like you said, with heritage overlay, then yes, you're looking at a specific house. It's got to be protected for the following reasons, and what you do has to make sure that you don't see the extension from certain views and certain things like that. So no, I understand you. What I was going to mention as well is that often the character should be reevaluated using community consultation every few years, so that the character is constantly current and reflects the community. I don't find that the community consultation is sufficient and done in an appropriate way, and therefore what you will end up getting is, yes, you'll have a large number of people attending, but they might be a very specific subset of the community that don't necessarily reflect all of the values within that community, because it's held during business hours, and therefore you've only got the unemployed and elderly who are attending this, and not the employed and younger people who might have wanted to contribute, for example. So I don't necessarily believe that the neighbourhood character should be adhered to like it's a gospel, and we tend to remind council of that when we put in applications, and we talk about that and talk about what we believe the character is. We evaluate the character of an area when we put in an application to say, this is what we think is an appropriate response to this site.
Yeah, and I think it's a terminology thing just for people to be aware of, that what you're talking about with regards to a neighbourhood character is not necessarily the same as what another area might call a character. So in some instances they're talking about the character of the suburb, whereas in other instances they're talking about the character of the dwelling itself. And so always important that you are engaging with a local expert that is understanding, I guess, the idiosyncrasies of that local jurisdiction.
That's right.
There are many twists and turns in this, but Wesley, it's been a very, very interesting conversation, mate. Thank you very much. If you were going to pass some words of wisdom on anyone wanting to engage, I guess, in a project that they think that might have some heritage and or character at all, what would that words of wisdom be, mate?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're all expecting to hear the same advice from any expert who's going to say, oh, you need to hire us right from the first day. I think, I mean, of course, I agree with that advice, because we can, and even before you buy a property, because as part of your due diligence, if you've got a site with a heritage overlay, we can really help you to sort of recognize where there might be opportunities that you probably haven't considered because you've just assumed the whole thing can't be touched, but actually the back bit can be touched, or most of it can be demolished because none of it's original, or that sort of thing. So we can really help guide you through that and give you advice that that we believe council will support. Additionally, I think that people often freak out when they see our fees because they think, oh, that's sort of an additional expense that I could do without. But they don't realize that we're saving you a hell of a lot more than what you might have to spend if you go through this very arduous clerical process of going through council applications to get your development approved, getting it constantly rejected. I mean, I've assisted architects who have been doing an application on behalf of their client who have gone multiple times and kept getting rejected. And then finally we got it through because I weighed in and said, this is what you need to do and let me review it before you submit it. And once they did all of that, they said, okay, we approve of it in principle, but we just need you to make the following minor alterations. So it's just things like that where you think, well, someone's going to be paying for this. That client has been paying this architect through the nose because the architect didn't know how to appropriately respond to the heritage issues associated with that site and character and neighbourhood. And it was completely avoidable. Yes, you hired an architect. Well done. You've taken the first step in getting contributing nicely to your neighbourhood. But also what you need to be doing is knowing what you can do if there's a heritage overlay on there. Some heritage overlays are also heavily undervalued too. Properties within a heritage overlay are undervalued because there is an assumption that you can't do anything with them. So if you do find a property that seems cheap with a heritage overlay, don't necessarily disregard it. Yeah.
So you touched on a really interesting thing that just sparked my mind, mate, and that is when you put any sort of application like this through to council, where you're going to be doing a partial demolition or a complete demolition or that sort of thing, anticipate that council by default is going to say no. They have to be seen to be doing the right thing by their voters and their constituents. Now, they may actually agree with your arguments. Correct. But they still need to be seen to be doing the right thing. They need to put up a valid argument that that the community can see council has actually tried to protect this. Correct. Now, whilst the arguments that you've got might be valid, you may have to, be considerate of taking that through to the next level of court. In your instance, VCAT. We've got QCAT. There's, all the different cats in all the different parts of the state, parts of the country. Be prepared that you may have to take that on. And if you're going to take that on, there's going to be costs, both time, money, an emotional toll. That's probably one to be not be considered the faint of heart. So you need to have engaged with an appropriate heritage architect up front to know that your arguments are going to stand up when you take it to that next level, and that your feasibility has factored in that those additional costs and a plan B if it doesn't quite doesn't get across the line.
Yeah, I've actually had a project where we did a pre-app meeting. So we'd only just started the design process, and council on the phone told me, look, we're going to be honest with you right now. Whatever you put in, we're going to reject it, full stop. This has to go to VCAT because we do not want to be seen to support this. And so we had a discussion with the client and they said, sure, okay, let's get the rejection ASAP so we can go ahead to VCAT. And that's what we did. And we got it approved by VCAT. But
council can hold their hand on heart and we did the right thing.
Straight out of the gate, they told us that exactly what you said.
Yeah. Unfortunate that they're not pragmatic and understanding that those exact same voters, they're playing with their rates and that sort of things. They're not considering of that. But Nonetheless, mate, very interesting conversation. Thank you very much. We are going to get Wesley back at some point in the future as an industry expert at our Victorian events. That's where he's based. So for those of you folks that don't know, we run events all the way around the country: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. You can turn up to these physically. You can also live stream them, so no matter where you are. So Wesley, we'll get you back at another point in time in Melbourne to go deep into the bowels of Melbourne's specific jurisdictional challenges. So folks, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time, mate.
My pleasure.
Until next time, folks, bye for now. See you at an upcoming meetup. Bye.